Hello everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Gaming in the Wild, a video games podcast about games from the artistic, creative side of the tracks, from indie to AAA. My name's John, I'm your host, and this week in Reykjavik, I finished off Sable. After last week's episode, I went back into the game. I'd really loved my time with that game and had a wonderful time with it. I went back in, I found out a couple of the late game quests that I had outstanding, and really just kind of said goodbye to it for now. Just did a little driving around in the desert, did a little bit of exploration, and just enjoying that beautiful world. And this week's episode is actually a special episode. It's an interview with Daniel and Greg of Shedworks Studio, the creators of Sable. I was lucky enough to be able to catch up with them. A very tired Daniel and Greg, it has to be said. They're still working on patches for the game, and it had been out for less than a week when we spoke. So I'm very grateful to them for making time to come on the podcast and talk about the game. I hope that you enjoy the conversation that we had. It was a real pleasure to get to talk to them about all of the kind of striking details of that world, the architecture, the textiles, the wildlife, and the gameplay design, and the original seeds of the idea of Sable, and to just really dig into some of those things and find out what their thinking was in designing the game. So it's quite a long chat that we had. It's about an hour long, so I'll keep this intro short. But before that interview begins, I will just mention that this show is Patreon supported, it's listener supported. So whether you're a first-time listener today or someone that's been listening to the show for a while, you're very welcome to support the show for as little as $1 a month over at patreon.com/gaminginthewild. And for being a member, you'll get invited to the show's Discord community. You'll get sale recommendations from me, especially when games that I've covered on the show go on sale. And you'll get occasional extra episodes, a few extra episodes a year that are made just for patrons on themes like video game music and off-topic discussions and spoiler casts and that kind of thing. So that's patreon.com/gaminginthewild if you're interested in becoming a supporter of the show. And the last episode of this podcast, number 74, was a full review of Sable. I talked at length about my experience of the game, the things that leapt out at me as being interesting about it, the design, the architecture, the gameplay, its story, all of these great elements, the way that they intertwine to make a really nice experience. So if you're not familiar with Sable, I would suggest going and listening to episode 74, first of all, to get a rundown of the game, what it's all about. I will also mention that there are a few discussions of plot points in the game and the kind of the backdrop, the cultural backdrop and history of the world of Sable. These topics do come up during the interview. So if you're yet to play Sable, you might want to save this one for later. There is some discussion of the kind of plot points that it might be fun for you to discover for yourself by playing the game. No huge kind of clanger spoilers, but definitely some things that I had fun discovering during my own playthrough. So with all of that said, let's move on. I hope you enjoy this interview with Daniel and Greg of Shedworks. So I'm very happy to be joined for this episode by Greg and Daniel of Shedworks, the two-person studio behind Sable.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello guys, thanks for being here, and how are you?
Tired.
Yeah, doing okay. Just hanging in there. We're trying to get a patch together for fixing a couple of bugs, and that's a bit of a scramble.
I think you think release is going to be the kind of end of the race, but it never is. And I mean, we kind of had that in mind. We've done smaller mobile projects before where you release a game and you think, yeah, that's it, I'm done. But really, it's just a milestone and you have to keep going. And if you're not psychologically kind of prepared for that, I mean, even being prepared for that is difficult. But if you're not, then I think it's even more difficult because there's so much emotion involved in it. There's so much physical drain involved in it, just like the work you do to get a game over the line.
It's also that we were working pretty much all the way up to the sort of last possible moment to get it finished. So it means there's not really much of a gap between sort of like finishing work on the thing and then it being out in the world. So you don't really get a chance to sort of stop and prepare yourself. It's just kind of a couple of weeks ago we were working on this, and now it's out, and yeah,
And the work continues.
and the work continues.
Yeah.
So I've been following the process of Sable for quite a while, since that very first trailer. I've been very enthusiastic for it to come out, and I'm really glad that it's finally here. I had a great time with the game. I've played it from end to end, and I've loved it. I've had a really nice time with it.
Yeah, thank you.
I was wondering if we could start by talking about some of the initial inspirations that led you to come up with the idea, how you started working together on it, and how Sable began.
Yeah, I think I was listening to your podcast, I think, earlier, and I think you were you talking about Rey at the beginning of the Force Awakens?
Yeah.
Yeah,
It struck me that first sequence where Rey is abseiling down into a wreck and scavenging and sand surfing on her hoverbike were actually, that they turned out to be kind of the best moments of the entire recent Star Wars trilogy.
yeah. I mean, well, that's where the idea kind of came from for the game Sable.
We had exactly the same thought.
Yeah. So watching that and then thinking, okay, what if Rey never left? What if she wasn't the hero? What if we made a game about someone like that? And it was the broad concept. It was the broad idea. There's just the origin point. It was never quite as explicit as like, oh, we're going to make a game about Rey from Star Wars. But that's where the ideas.
Yeah, I think we were struck by the solitude of her character, and also obviously like the grandeur of the sort of ruined Star Destroyer kind of crashed in the desert. That was a really striking shot.
Yeah.
And yeah, we just thought that would translate really nicely to an exploration game.
Yeah.
That was the seed, and then we kind of just built it up from there. Just sort of started working on a prototype of a desert and getting a little hover car that you can drive around, and just trying to sort of we sort of had the idea of like seeing stuff on the kind of the player would sort of scan the horizon looking for things to do, things to explore, and then you see a thing that looks interesting, sort of silhouette on the horizon, and you could drive out to that, and then anything that you could see, you could drive to it and you could explore it, and you could kind of learn about the world by just kind of chasing these silhouettes on the horizon, I guess.
Right, and the gameplay with the free climbing and the free exploration and an open map and a wide horizon in front of you where you can go to anything you can see and explore and find a story through discovery. It reminds me of Breath of the Wild. I was wondering if Breath of the Wild was a reference point for you and an influence on the game.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the seed of the idea came before Breath of the Wild was even announced, really. We kind of had the idea in sort of 2016, because that trailer for Force Awakens, that was kind of like 2015, I think.
Maybe it was announced by then, but yeah, it was early. We didn't really know what Breath of the Wild even was, but
So we kind of had our idea for the concept before that, but Breath of the Wild was a really good kind of proof of concept. It was it gave us some good pointers as to like how you can actually kind of execute on that. We had both, I think, got quite sick of open world games by 2017. They were getting very formulaic and they were very long. I think Breath of the Wild kind of swept that away.
Yeah. I think a big thing for us was, so we created this very first prototype in 2016, early 2016, and there was just this sense of, it was just some dunes, 2 kilometer by 2 kilometer dune asset that we downloaded from the Unity asset store, and this hover car asset, and we kind of put this giant cube in the distance, and you could just see it and drive over to it through these dunes, and there was just like a sense of wanderlust that simple setup created, and we tried to really protect and retain that feeling from the beginning of development, and we knew, okay, this journey that you take is the core of the game. We have to figure out what you then arrive at the end and what that looks like. But we were really protective about about that journey and about that experience, and the kind of feeling of like, I think what makes dunes really interesting is they obfuscate as well as they create this undulating landscape, and it kind of almost looks flat at a certain height, but then when you start to move across it, you dip in and you kind of disappear, and then the thing that you're keeping track of also disappears, and then the next time you kind of peek over and see the thing, whatever the object was in the distance, it's maybe a totally different location than what you expected, or different angle, or it's just closer, and it recontextualizes it, and that kind of there's a kind of playfulness to that hiding and reveal. On it as basic level, you think of a child and kind of peekaboo, playing peekaboo. It's kind of like playing peekaboo, but with the geographically, and I think that was really a really useful thing that a desert environment just created those moments for us. And yeah,
Right, like being on the ocean, there's like an undulating effect that gives you a fun journey.
Exactly, and then as a game designer, as a world builder, you can hide things in the dunes. So okay, you dip down this dune and you find an old ruined ship, and you weren't expecting that. You didn't see that from a distance. You just stumbled upon it, or you stumbled upon a little forest, or oasis, or whatever. But I think as well there was this idea that the player would set out to do one thing and maybe get diverted or distracted by something else, and that was really important to the kind of core experience that we wanted to create as well.
Yeah. To bring it back to Breath of the Wild, I think something that it really showed us, or it made us realize, was we obviously knew that we wanted our world to be the kind of main mechanism for delivering the story of the game. It's not a sort of structured story with like a sort of really detailed script. And most of the world building, most of the storytelling comes from the environments and you exploring them. And obviously, once you've sort of played Breath of the Wild and you've experienced the climbing in that game and sort of the freedom that it gives you to like really sort of get into the nooks and crannies of the environment and the buildings and the locations, we kind of knew, okay, that I think it would have felt like...
Well, we knew that tied into the themes and things that we wanted to do with the game, or that style of exploration. I mean, I think we knew we wanted climbing, but it just answered a lot of questions, details for us.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think it was more in the details that would have taken us, months of experimentation to arrive at, maybe the same answer for, or I think even just created a way of communicating what the game could be at that point to other people. So, it was a shorthand, and I don't think it's, it helped us also, I think, get people into the headspace of what the game is.
It makes it much easier to explain to people what you expect them to do, or how you expect them to sort of interact with your world.
Yeah, I think that was actually the biggest benefit we got from that game, more than anything else.
Because otherwise, just on its own, they're like, oh, well, you're a girl and you're in a desert and you're kind of exploring it. It's kind of it sounds cool, but I think most people would be, their first response would be, but what do you actually do?
Yeah.
And so, they gave us a way of talking about what you actually do, kind of on a moment-to-moment basis.
But it's always a dangerous comparison to make as well, because obviously Breath of the Wild was made by Nintendo, much bigger team than us. And, they have their own intent, their own legacy, their own history to draw on, and it's a different game. We always knew that if we we'll never compare favorably next to that directly. We always have to do something different, and I think our game it does try to do something quite different, and be its own thing. And the same with the world, I think, and the world building. It's definitely a game we love and are inspired by. But yeah,
right, and it was a game that changed the way that open worlds work. Really, I've been following the response, the player response, and the critical response to Sable with a lot of interest, as I'm sure that you two have as well, of course. And something that has been interesting to me is that some players respond to that sense of freedom that we first got in an open world setting in Breath of the Wild, maybe. And they enjoy that freedom. They enjoy that kind of not just pinging from map marker to map marker as we do in so many other open world games. And a certain kind of player doesn't like that quite so much and feels that it's a little bit unguided, that kind of gameplay. So I was curious about how you feel about that, about the difference in map based and kind of the aimless, pleasantly aimless style of open world exploration that we see in Sable, and the response to that.
Yeah, we had no idea what sort of response we'd get at launch. I mean, the week before launch, we were just like, we had no idea. I mean, we knew that it wasn't going to be a game for everyone. It was just whether or not it was a game for someone.
Yeah.
We had no idea. We knew. I think we had an idea that, like, if either of us hadn't made this game and were to play the game, we would like it. But we could never have that perspective. It's
Yeah, I remember feeling like we had. When I look back on the sort of very early prototypes, I feel like we actually stuck pretty close to our original vision. And so when I asked myself sort of objectively, did you achieve your goal? I felt like we had. And so there was a point several years ago when I thought that goal would have made a cool game, and that's why we made it. So I felt like, yeah, we'd achieved what we set out to do. And yeah, it's incredibly gratifying when you hear people talking about how it resonates with them. I think especially we made a really conscious effort to not just to give them that sort of freedom in gameplay terms, but to really tie it to the themes of the story and the character's journey. That was something that I think we always felt like we had an edge over games like Breath of the Wild. Something that we could do that they didn't really do is that, we wanted a character who had opinions and had her own thoughts, and this was her life, and the kind of the theme of coming of age and of sort of finding yourself and deciding who you want to be. We always like the idea for the gameplay came first, the exploration gameplay, and then we felt that this sort of very, very broad, quite universal, sort of relatable sort of theme to the story, we thought that those meshed together really nicely. And so, yeah, kind of hearing people respond to not just the gameplay, but sort of the whole thing, and the gameplay wrapped up with the themes of the story and everything. When you see someone sort of when you see someone get it like that, that's really special.
Right, the story does tie in so nicely with the exploration, with your reason for moving through this landscape and for going on this adventure with Sable. It adds to the kind of the believability of it all. And another thing that does so is the level of detail that is found in the world. I found it to be a very believable, authentic feeling world, and there were many little details that made it kind of cohere into a world that felt real and felt nice to explore and felt like a real place. And one of the first details that I noticed was actually the tents. The tents have the guy ropes, and the design of the tents, they feel like well constructed in a way that that feels really real and has a kind of a texture to it. I was wondering about, like, even the guy ropes, I was wondering about the design process of putting those little details into the world, and if that was a key consideration in making the world of Sable.
Yeah, the guy ropes specifically, I remember making those, and probably spent way too long on them quite early on in development. And I mean, the tents generally...
Yeah, it makes such a big difference.
We always knew they would be important because of the nomadic lifestyle, right? So did a lot of research looking at different kind of tent building styles across different cultures, different aspects, but also just like aesthetically, trying to create a visual language for them that would kind of make them feel distinct with this world. And I think, my background is I studied architecture.
Right, it shows.
And so, I have an awareness of structure and detailing in that sense. And so I'm glad that came across. I mean, it's one of these things where you add these details and, there's a lot of thought that goes into it. So like the fixings, for example, I designed to be shaped kind of like beetle, like horns. And I'm not sure if that comes across or not, but that was meant to be like a ornamental expression of like part of the culture. And the tents themselves had this beetle structure, and each one is meant to reflect the kind of, so each tent has an owner who wears a beetle mask. And the idea is that carried through to the architecture. And so the tent structure itself is meant to be almost like beetle shaped, but not explicitly so, just kind of more suggestively so. But each one has its own variation. So the color of it and the structure of it is influenced by the beetles local to the area that it was created. And so those, for example, were really influenced by the world building in that sense. And it's one of these things that you kind of do so much work on and so much research on and iteration on, and you never get to talk about it. Like it's never interesting to say to someone in the game. I mean, you never get to talk about it in the game because it's never interesting to explain this stuff to someone. You just have to hope, like, for the people that get this, it resonates and they like get it, or they get a sense, even if they don't understand explicitly where these ideas have come from, they get a sense of like the depth of the idea and where that's coming from. So for the tent specifically, there was a few research books I looked into, and yeah, just knew that I had to take that side of it quite seriously and make it feel quite believable. So yeah, I like that you brought up that the ties specifically, just because that was a detail I remember doing, like probably in 2018, I think, around the idea of it being a beetle horn of some kind.
Right, and it's one of many structures that leaps out in that way. Another one is the machinists' places of work, which are kind of a flat bed for working on vehicles, and a little shack on the back that looks almost like a tugboat.
Yeah. So those bases, like the design of that or the idea behind everything is that it's nomadic, right? So those in theory, we never got to do it in the game, but those are like hover ships, right? So they fold them up and move with wherever they needed to go. We never actually got to set one up so that it did move and fly. But again, the idea is like originally actually they were more tent-like, and they had this kind of like more industrial quality to them, but it was kind of, I kept thinking to myself, like, how would they actually move this heavy gear? It doesn't really make sense. It was like this incredibly heavy industrial gear. It's like, it's not very nomadic, is it? So then I think quite late, I think last year, I revisited the design of that and turned them into ships themselves, because that made sense to me. Okay, it's a lot of heavy gear. Maybe they'd have an actual vehicle for getting this around, and if they're repairing vehicles, it all ties into. So that was the idea behind that asset. And yeah, again, like trying to, and you're trying to, it's not just about the detailing and the practical side of it. It's also like on a gameplay level, you're trying to communicate to the player, like, this is a place where the machinists are based. So you're trying to communicate that visually from a distance. Okay, you can come over here and customize your bike. And the same for the beetle, the stations, the tents. It's like, you can come over here and this is what you can expect. And you're trying to create this language of communication for players that does both world building, but also acts as a symbol, as an icon to allow the player to navigate, because we don't get to do that with a map screen or a mini map as explicitly. So creating a visual language around that was really important. And yeah, it took a bit of iteration, but I think the ones in those camps came fairly early on, apart from the machinist. That was just an extra iteration quite later on. But Yeah, I have some fun architectural drawings of the Beetle one actually, like sections and stuff. I think after a while, the architectural drawings kind of faded away as I started trying to like get fixes in quicker. But early on, that was the approach as well. It was very like sections and plans and cut throughs and stuff like that.
Right, and it does have a cumulative effect. I think all of those little details that you've put into the game, all of those little meticulous design choices, and tying the story to the environment and to the ways of living that we see in the game. Because in open worlds, we're often used to seeing a hub or a base that is kind of copy pasted from one to another, and they do have a very lived in feeling in Sable that seems to lean into the idea of this nomadic culture and of the places being different and specific and having their own identity and their own atmosphere.
Definitely.
Yeah, no, I mean that makes me happy to hear because it's you can't know, we can't know, like we can only hope that that's the effect of this kind of accumulation of decisions that we made over many years. And I think there's what you're talking, like the kind of copy and paste idea. Obviously these are some reused assets, but I think we tried to really modify the environment around the assets to give each place a different feeling, a different context. And I think you get some really fun moments where, like, so the ships, for example, you can actually literally copy and paste a ship because it makes sense. It that's the kind of environment it is. Whereas a tent is more organic and more dynamic and lived in, and it is affected by who's built it and when. And so the actual internal layouts of each of the tents has a bit more differentiation. I think we just turned around the like desk where the Beetle tent owner is in one of them, for example, just to give it that kind of like, oh, I'm familiar with this, but there's something different about this one. Like I encounter this moment a bit sooner for some reason, and it's nothing. It does nothing. It doesn't change anything. It's just a detail. But yeah, you're trying to play with the psychology of players, I guess, and you can never know. You can never know. Even when people give feedback, it's like, are they just giving me this because I'm asking them about it? And it's not the sort of detail that you can ask about without by asking about it influencing the result of the feedback. So yeah.
Right, and I mean, I work at a video game company also, and one of my favorite things is, for example, making a theme park environment. It might be like a staff member on a break, standing out the back and having a cigarette, or like a really detailed entrance hall with turnstiles. So rather than the roller coaster or what seems like the main event, it's sometimes those little details that really makes you snap into a world and feel like it's a real place.
Yeah. They're hard to do though. You have to really.
Yeah.
It's not they're hard to add. They're hard to make a priority.
Yeah. Individually, they all feel like quite low priority tasks compared to like building a new level or making a puzzle or whatever. And for them to have the effect that you want, you need loads of these details. It's about the layering. It's about building details on top of details. And then obviously it's also, we've got loads and loads of locations in our game. And I think you need to be really careful of is you don't want one area to be much more detailed than the others. If you spend ages kind of really, putting loads of effort into, the town or a particular camp, then that's kind of the flaw for what people expect. And then it means you need to sort of make sure you...
Yeah, it makes everything else look worse if something else looks better. So you have to find that balance. But actually bringing it back to like that copy and paste idea, even with the ships, which, you can do a bit more of that. They should.
Right, they're all made in one place.
Exactly. I think you even mentioned it in your podcast about the game, the different entrances into each ship. Like that was a really conscious choice to try and tell a story about the materiality of these ships and how they could like be kind of investigated in different ways. And it also creates contrast and unique experiences per ship. But it was really important that it wasn't just a generic entrance for each ship, because they had this kind of industrial quality to them, and this, you're always trying to add the human hand to something that is virtually created. Copy and pasting is the easiest thing to do, right? You get a perfect copy that you can carry across, whereas even just like we would in the art style try and wobble the lines a little bit just to give them a hand crafted feel, because otherwise it feels, you can make a perfect cube so easily in 3D software, but if you just wobble, give it a little bit of sagging in the middle or whatever, the eye reads it as more either drawn by a hand or reads it as a more organic matter. And obviously you take the opposite approach with something more industrial, but yeah, that was something we really thought a lot about, adding imperfection to the style of the game, because with this clean line style, you can get really perfect lines very easily, and it looks like it's a computer. And we really spent a lot of time early on thinking about how we made this game look handmade. And I mean, all the textures pretty much were drawn on the iPad by hand.
Yeah.
Pretty much every single texture in the game, apart from a couple that we had to handle in different ways, like the rocks. Although originally they were hand drawn as well, which had to recreate them slightly differently. And it was just really important to give the world that human touch, I think.
Right, I love that about the ships. It's almost the most Ray moment is when you're circling a ship looking for the way in, and it might have been a side that was torn off, or it might be like a tiny little crack on the back of a grating on a thruster of a ship. I think those were the moments at which Ray's kind of that moment of scavenging was the most crystallized.
It's also about reminding the player that someone else has been here before you, and that, okay, this grate being moved out the way, well, someone did that. Someone else has been here before you. Someone else has probably explored this ship before. And yeah, so it's also just, it's an opportunity to do a little bit of storytelling about the history of the place as well.
Right, and there are three layers of culture that are being talked about in this game, aren't there? There's the nomadic civilization that you were a part of. There is the Hikaric society.
Yeah.
And then there's the era that came before that led to all of this, the kind of the spacefaring times.
Yeah. The atomic era, we'd call it, but yeah.
Right. And so it's really storytelling with three layers of society having been built over each other from three different periods. It's a really effective way of storytelling, and it's like you're exploring three landscapes at once in a way, like a sort of a technological time, and then the post-era of, I guess, settlement, when those ships have come down onto the planet, and then the cultures that are resultant of that, right through to the present day and the nomadic civilization that Sable is a part of.
Yeah, it was three things that we knew we wanted to have in the game for variety reasons, just on a practical level, but it was also a big part of the story we wanted to tell, about kind of living in a place where there was history all around you, and a lot of hubris and mistakes had been made, and things had happened, but things had carried on, and people had just adapted and started living in different ways, and they tried to do things the old way, and they tried to, build things in a way that they knew worked before, and maybe it didn't work in this new context, and that was part of the story we wanted to tell. But
yeah, I think in a very loose way, the sort of story of the history of humanity on this planet kind of matches the story of Sable, right? That she's told to sort of go out into this desert and learn about it, and learn how to kind of get by in it and to live in it and to survive and to thrive. And you see that humanity had to kind of go through the same process, that they have these kind of big industrial ships and stuff, which they didn't. The idea is that that stuff doesn't come from this planet, that comes from space, from Earth or whatever. Though we don't really get into the details of it too much, but it's more just about, they obviously abandoned this stuff because it doesn't really suit the environment. They can build these big buildings and structures, but it's difficult to maintain, and it's unforgiving conditions. And we wanted to tell a story. We've never thought of the game as post-apocalyptic, although it's a label that people often kind of give it at first glance, just because it's full of, kind of ruins, and that usually brings to mind disaster. And it's not so much that something went horribly wrong on this planet and that's why they're all just living in tents. They live that way because it's the best way to survive in this environment, and they just don't need that stuff. They don't need the actual technology that the people in this world have access to is more advanced than the technology we have in real life. We don't actually have hover bikes, and their lives aren't simple because they've been.
But their lives aren't simple.
Their lives aren't simple, full stop. But we wanted to tell a story of a society that's flourishing and that's sustainable, and that they have a real history and they have a real culture.
Yeah. And they acknowledge these as limited resources, so they kind of take care of them and respect them in a way that I think a lot of people don't at the moment. And I think there's a fourth world that we kind of also tie into these things, and that's the natural world, right? Like a lot of the beetles and stuff, we try to make sure that there's a overlapping interaction between all of these elements. And I think you get some really nice moments where we try and create overlaps there, and you start to see how things sit on top of or together and interact with each other and are adapted to one another or not adapted in contrast to one another. And it was important to just make the world feel like a real place by giving it that progression over time. If things didn't interact and overlap or acknowledge each other, then it feels like it would feel less authentic. And I think we also tried to carry that through in some of the characterizations, and tried to show how some of the characters are more reverent of these things and some of them are less so. And I think we really wanted to have that contrast in the game, because I think that's how people would approach it in real life, in a realistic way. And we wanted to have this extraordinary place, but with people living ordinary lives and going about and surviving and doing fairly mundane things in a lot of cases, or mundane to them, but maybe not mundane to us. But I think that was really important for us to create a believable world, and that was always what this game was about creating this believable world for you to live in and explore and be in.
There was a nice moment with the scrapper guy who's just got his feet up on the desk, and I guess he's kind of diving into these majestic ruins, but to him it's just scrapping.
Yeah.
We thought that was a really nice contrast with the machinists who, they are incredibly reverent of the old technology, and for them it's an almost religious experience to work with these machines. And then for the scrapper it's just raw materials. It's just it's not junk. It's useful. It's how he lives. But it's mundane. We wanted to. That contrast is really important. Is the mundane and the reverent.
Yeah, and it goes into a little bit of your choice based on choosing a mask and what Sable will become too. Like, what kind of person do you want her to be? Do you want her to be just an explorer pulling out machinery, or do you want her to be kind of exploring the spiritual connection, or do you want her to be involved in the natural world and all of these things? It kind of opens up those choices to you in a very real way, because these people become role models for potential careers, basically, or what that career might look like, what that life might look like for Sable.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I think, we weren't even, there was some points where you couldn't actually pick all of the masks that you could collect. We were kind of like hesitating to let players choose certain masks, I think. And then at the end, we were just like, you know what, it makes sense that you could just pick whatever. And like it, even if it's an outrageous choice in reality, like some of the masks would be pretty strange for Sable
Right,
to
there's
emerge
the
with.
shade.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly.
And there's a
Basically, you can choose to be Batman.
yeah, and we thought, no, actually, it's really important that you can pick any. You know, it would be antithetical to what the game is about if you couldn't, but also it's important to have that irreverence for what we've made ourselves in this world. And I think we had it in the characters up to that point, but we almost sleptwalk into not having it in the ending, which I'm glad we went back and
Yeah,
added
that was a good choice.
Yeah,
Definitely.
Right, and my choice was to pick the ship mask, which has no cultural reference point whatsoever in this world, but it just felt like a strong choice for Sable to just be something new.
Yeah, well, that was one we weren't sure about. We
Yeah.
were kind of thinking to ourselves, is this even a mask? Does this
Yeah.
really count?
Right, you were discouraged from doing it a little bit, almost. Like Sable said, like, is this a calling,
Yeah, I think that was important. Like, again, it must have came in the last 2 weeks of development, those things.
Yeah.
But we really wanted to convey that, like, this was not a choice that your clan would approve of. This was something, and that was important to the themes of the game and what we were trying to set up earlier. And it would have been such a missed opportunity not to do it in retrospect. So I'm really happy we did. But it's important that you can make choices that are that aren't going to please everyone, or maybe literally will alienate you from society. But that was kind of why adding those things in was so crucial, and having it be a little bit irreverent. It can be quite funny, some of the ones you pick, like even the entertainer's mask. It's very like floppy and kind of goes all over the place, and like in the ending cutscene, which is quite like sincere and serious, and it has this beautiful kind of this beautiful track of music in the background, and then seeing Sable emerge from this ruin and jump off into the landscape, returning home, starting her life with this floppy mask kind of dragging behind. It was actually a really funny moment, and we were kind of like, actually, this is hilarious as well. Like, it's not just it changes the tone completely, but it's just really simple fix.
I think we were worried for a while that it would undermine the tone of the game, but actually, I think we realized that it's a serious game, but we wanted there to be moments of levity, and we wanted, at the end of the day, the freedom and the player choice, I think it trumped everything else. It really was essential it was the core message of the whole game. So it was definitely worth it to sort of follow through on that.
Right. And life is very much like that. It's not, sometimes there are these kind of silly moments in serious situations. It's kind of real feeling.
100%.
Yeah. And also just, the conversation that you have, even just how you even get the entertainer's badge. You have to have quite a sort of serious and meaningful conversation with a character. Probably one of the most sort of serious parts of the game. So, I think it still fits.
Right, and a couple of things to finish off that conversation about design, especially. It feels like something else that really caught my eye, along with the tents, etc., was the bird life in this game. I think it was about halfway through the game because you kind of see birds everywhere in life. They're everywhere doing their thing, and they're often in games, but they are not often behaving in games the way they behave in Sable, which is a point at which I think I noticed a line of, I guess what would be starlings or blackbirds or something like that, kind of lining up on a rooftop, looking in the same direction, the way that migratory birds do. And seeing the way that the kind of hummingbirds behaved, and catching sight of a hawk, which was like a really, like my heart stopped for a moment. I was like, like the way that you do if you see one in real life, if you see like a kestrel or an eagle, And then I started watching them and was like, oh my God, the amount of effort that's been put in here with these murmurations and with this behavior of birds. It's another detail, along with the design of the tent textiles and all of these things, that really snaps that world into being like a real place. So I was wondering which one of you is the bird enthusiast and how that made it into the game.
That's Greg.
Yeah. I mean, actually, I think, I always knew birds would be important to the game, but actually, I guess during lockdown, working from home, I would sometimes work in my kitchen and have the door open and start putting seeds out for these birds. And we used to get blackbirds coming every day. There's a couple that we named, like a female and a male, and they used to come every day and sing and kind of like bring a lot of life to the garden and like to spaces. And that really, I remember that really feeling like, and I know I can hear the song that they sing in my head now as well. But I knew that like getting specifically the birds in the ruins, I think early on was really important because they provide like a sense of life to a place that, and in habitation and use to places that don't have it, right? And so, and scale as well, just visually, they provide scale, moments of scale, and this kind of, that's really important. And just movement and life and energy, I think they just bring so much of that. And getting variety in behaviors, again, brings that kind of feeling of ecology that I think we tried to introduce an elements to the game, like the beetles and stuff like that. But the beetles are kind of more mechanical, like they're part of the puzzles, whereas the birds are purely aesthetic. They're purely there to create a sense of place. And so you can have a bit more fun with the movement there. And like, it makes me really happy that you picked up on that stuff. Again, it's just a detail. It's just something that we added.
We added it quite late as well, because again, it's one of those details where it always feels like it's kind of low priority compared to fixing a bug or tidying up an environment or something. But you have to manually go, and Greg, I think you spent kind of a whole week just manually going through every location in the game and just plopping birds down on all of the posts and stuff.
But you need it, and I think even the grounded, like we have the chickens in Ecria, and then there's a unique type of bird that you only find in the palm forest that runs around on the floor, and it has this kind of floppy pink head thing, and then unique birds per biome. There are some that have 4 wings rather than 2 in the white desert, and then we have like other more kind of generic looking ones, which are just like these kind of black raven like creatures. And I think as well, just like placing them in their level design so they kind of explode when you do a jump is really fun. Like it's always fun to do that. And I think as well, again, coming back to like, if you have an environment where interaction space is quite low, you can climb on things and you can do things, but there's nothing like, there's no switches to pull necessarily or something like that, then I think, again, it's always satisfying to see a bird and like scare it off or something and just, oh no, it's a real, like, things are reacting to me, I'm here. And we try to really create that like connection to the built environment in a lot of ways. Like the sound design is really important to that, different surfaces having different sounds and
for the footsteps.
And also like ambience and echoes and, like our sound designer Martin worked, and Daniel did a lot of the implementation alongside some of the other team members, and that stuff was really important to create a sense of place. And I think even when you drive through the desert and you hear like crickets, we don't have any like physical crickets that you can like follow, but you can hear them, and it made such a huge difference to, again, creating that sense of life, because deserts, you can't necessarily see all the life that's occurring there, but they are very lively places in reality. There's a lot going on kind of below the surface, and I think the sound design particularly conveyed that. And then there are just some technical things that we did to ground the character Sable. Like we have this thing called IK, which means that her feet will kind of automatically adjust to stand on a surface correctly. So she'll kind of put one foot down on a step and one foot up, and again, like if you're just floating above in a game, which is kind of the traditional method of handling that. Although IK is pretty standard now, but back on the PS2 you would never have IK, and again that just creates this connection between the kind of avatar of Sable and the world that we built, and that stuff. The interaction with the birds, the sound design, the IK, all of these things, I think we just really knew. They're subtle, they're just details, they don't functionally do anything, but they're really, really important for the world we're trying to build and making it feel like a real place.
Right. And that cumulative effect of all of those choices that were made in the game really, really adds up. In a game that is about exploring and experiencing the environment, it's key to have that grounded sensation of being in a place that has a feeling to it and a history to it, and it really worked out.
I'm again really happy to hear that, because we don't know.
We had no idea.
Yeah, we add stuff, we'll add a detail, and you get to see it with fresh eyes, like just right at the beginning. So when you add the first bird and it flies away, you're like, oh, that feels good. And then you really have to hope it continues feeling good for players, because I'm putting them down and then testing it. And it's quite tiresome to test it, because you have to start the game and go find the place. And you're just like, okay, at this point, this is no longer an emotional experience for me. It's just a technical one. And so we'll never get to enjoy the world in the same, at least not now. Maybe when we forget about what we did, I think that's how it tends to work, is sometimes I'll because we've worked on this game so long now, some of the things I forgot are in the game and I'll stumble upon, and then I'll get to experience it, not quite freshly, but with like just a tiny insight into maybe what someone might feel playing the game for the first time. And maybe long term we'll get to we'll totally forget what was in there and get to experience it freshly for the first time.
Yeah, I hope so. I wanted to talk as well about the kind of the architectural centerpiece, I guess, of the game. Well, I guess there's Ecria, but the thing that really leapt out to me was the watch, because it's got such a different kind of tone to it as a place. Like Ecria obviously is this kind of tumble down city, and you have these kind of ramshackle nomadic places, but then you have this kind of piece of architecture that could have been plucked out of Greenwich, complete with like a kind of statue there, and it has an almost kind of, it's more formal, and it has a slightly kind of colonial feeling to it perhaps, or something like that with the statues, and suddenly that brings to mind like a different aspect of this kind of lost culture that you're experiencing. But I mean, I was thinking this must have been a very fun project for someone from an architectural background to put together this planetarium.
Yeah, it's fun. It's stressful because
there's a reason that's the only one.
That was about the fourth iteration of an observatory type space, and a lot of research went into that. Greenwich is a good reference, because I definitely looked at the observatory in Greenwich, and I've been there during development. But also I was looking at, I think, the observatories in Samarkand and the ones in India, the
Jantamanta,
Jantamanta
in Delhi.
Yeah, like all of these different structures. Even just like more modern, there's a really modern observatory in Cyprus that I was looking at structurally. But that's where my dad is from. Well, he's Cypriot. So I was looking there too. And just like the skies are obviously something that we're fascinated with just as humans, right? And I think if you came from the skies and you were kind of aware that you came from the skies, it was important to have an observatory for that reason.
And there's the statue outside is the astronaut holding her helmet. And that was a kind of really nice link between the historical periods.
Yeah, and you're right about the formalism. It was tied to the ideas behind it. It was kind of like this semi-scientific approach, but also tied in with a more like kind of like they're beginning to deify the kind of the skies, I guess, the stars, the sun a little bit with that structure, and the idea was that it carried that history and it carried a lot of information. It was almost like a archive of.
Yeah, it was about kind of documenting humanity's changing relationship with scientific knowledge, sort of in that world.
Yeah, and I think structurally, it ended up being actually simpler than it. At some point, it was like semi-occupied. It was like a ruin that had almost like a town in it, but the town was just of like machinists. So it was almost like a
machinist mecca.
Yeah, or like a university almost. Like that was the original idea,
right.
but we never. We had to redesign. I redid that structure several times. It was complicated, and actually the original puzzles were much more complicated. And trying to simplify that because we had this real time kind of day-night cycle, and I designed puzzles around that. The current puzzle does work around that, but we had to adapt it so you could solve it at any time because otherwise it's kind of boring just sitting there and waiting for time to pass. You can end up doing a little bit of that in this puzzle, but less so.
I put in all of the things and got all 6 working, I think.
Okay, yeah, fine. I mean, at the end of the day, we had to really set up that sequence so it could be followed in it. Basically, if you're designing puzzles like that, they either have to be tested so much if they're quite complicated, or be simple enough that you get a few chances of iterating them and testing them, but they're simple enough that people can work out. And I think with that one, it was more about storytelling. It was more about the player kind of following a sequence of events that would lead them to something and be part of a kind of sequenced experience. And the story of when the roof opens we really wanted that to be a special moment, and just the kind of the sundial structure. I forget the name. Armillary sphere. It was kind of like this giant armillary sphere it was designed around. I think that's what it's called. It was a really fun. It was a really fun environment to do. It was, and I guess it's one that I don't actually think about that much now. But
we actually did it quite early on. It was one of the earlier ones.
Yeah.
I think it was back when we were still quite ambitious about all of our puzzles being kind of really deeply embedded in the structures.
Yeah. And
we pulled it off, but it was so much work that we kind of we had to
take a step back from that approach.
But I'm glad we got one in, definitely.
Yeah. I think the wind tower is another example, but a bit more simple. And the ships had a bit more of a like generic approach to them puzzle-wise, but and then the face doors, we actually had a number of those, but we didn't manage to get them in time.
I like that the puzzles don't push on you too hard. It would kind of fracture the journey a little if you had to kind of, take a break from the game and come back to it the next day having thought about it or whatever. They are there to occupy you and to amuse you and for you to get through, but they're not there to stop the journey, to be like a kind of,
Yeah, and I mean, it was really important all along, production-wise as well as in terms of what the actual game ended up being, that players can walk away from puzzles at any point if they don't like it, if they don't want to engage with that sort of play style, or that was always something we were aware that would be.
Yeah, we needed players to be able to complete the game without solving all of the puzzles, and also just from a production standpoint. Really complicated puzzles require loads of testing. You need to find some fresh players, get them to test your puzzle, get their feedback on it, make some changes, and then find a whole new set of fresh players that have never seen it before. It's a long process, and our game is just huge, and we kind of knew that we would never have the time to really, really refine all of the puzzles. So we had to kind of err on the side of caution, and then obviously just the structure of the game being so freeform meant that if there was a puzzle that was really difficult, it was okay because you can just not do it. But
we had to be careful with that. No, and a lot of it is story. So with the observatory, like you say, it's storytelling. Right? It's about telling a specific story about a specific place in this world.
It's the moment in which you get the biggest glimpse of why those ships are there or where they came from, right? Because there's that orbital construction station that kind of is where all these ships were built, presumably.
Yeah, I almost don't want to talk too much about that stuff because it's part of the joy of it is letting it speak for itself.
A lot of the details of that are really loose as well. We were really careful. We didn't. I mean, we have ideas about the details of the timeline of the world and stuff, but we never really wanted to put too much of that into the game explicitly.
No.
That stuff was never. I don't think it's really that exciting to just tell players. It's fun when they feel fun when they feel like they've stumbled on something and they've got a glimpse of it. But when you just sit down and
it's about making the world feel layered and deep rather than creating a world but we still want players to feel relaxed about taking that in.
Yeah, that was the point where Horizon Zero Dawn fell apart for me, was when they started trying to explain why the world is full of robot dinosaurs. And it's like, I don't care why the world is filled with robot dinosaurs. And
sure.
Yeah, I think we don't have anything quite as silly as robot dinosaurs, but yeah, it's also just, we don't want the people in that world don't necessarily know all of the details of why they're there, and they have their own stories that they tell about it. We wanted to foreground that and the kind of the culture of the people today, the people that are living there now, and what it means to them, more than the details of what actually happened.
Yeah, and I think it's about, we also had this strong idea of misinterpretation in our heads around some of the history and misremembering and poor record keeping. These things affect our understanding of history, and we're constantly reinterpreting and understanding history in different ways. All the time, even now we're constantly doing that. So you can find one piece of evidence that totally changes how you interpret that, and we wanted to keep the spirit of that in the game for sure.
Yeah, and not just misinterpreting, but also just kind of reorienting that over time and through history, as cultures evolve and change, their values change as well, and their priorities change, and the things that they care about, the things that they revere, those change too. And so, like I was talking about, sort of their changing relationship with scientific knowledge. It's not that they don't have scientific knowledge. They're not superstitious people. Like the machinists, it's a religious experience for them, but they are scientists. They are mechanics. They are still trying to work out how things work and still interacting with the technology for practical purposes. We wanted to show that part of the reason that there are these ruins is that humanity used to have a sort of different approach to living and surviving in the desert, and so the people today, they're much more successful because they've learned to think about the world in a more sustainable way.
Right. And it does feel like a a very kind of safe place to be, the world of Sable. There are no enemies trying to kill you, and there is no fall damage, and there is no way to die, and you're free to explore and free to find these cultural relics and lost histories and so forth. And all of the things that you've talked about really do tie together and give a really resonant experience. I congratulate you on this game.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Fantastic, and it's been really good to talk to you about it.
It's been great to chat. Thank you.
Yeah, and is there anything coming next? You're just kind of you're patching and fixing and kind of continuing that process for now?
Yeah, pretty much. And then we need a bit of a holiday.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then we'll see. Yeah, we haven't really got any plans at the moment. We're kind of getting a sense of where we stand at the end of this. But we'll go back to the two of us before we had some freelancers on the project. And then kind of decide if we want to what we want to do.
Yeah, fix bugs. We need to add localization. We have translation for a couple of other languages coming in soon as well. So that's the next big task, really.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, good luck with it all, and well done on the game. And thanks for the time.
Cheers. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
So I hope you enjoyed that interview with Greg and Daniel from Shedworks. I'm a huge fan of Sable. It was a real pleasure to catch up with them, especially in that really interesting window of time when the game's release is still so fresh for them and they're still working on it. It's really interesting to meet people at moments like that when they've just been through something as big as releasing this game that they've worked for years on. So thanks very much to them. Thank you also to Susie over at Raw Fury and Simon, the publicist for Sable, for helping me set this up. And thank you to you for listening. Hope you enjoyed the show. You can come and follow Gaming in the Wild on Twitter and Twitch and YouTube and Instagram. I'm active on all of those. Twitter is the main place that I tweet out news about the show, new episodes, and just regular kind of gaming chat, really, screenshots, opinions about games that I'm playing. I really like to hear from people who listen to the show, so if you've enjoyed this episode, if you yourself have any thoughts about Sable or about things that came up in this interview, then please feel free to reach out to me on social media. I will also mention again that this show is listener supported, so patreon.com/gaminginthewild if you're interested in supporting the show for as little as $1 a month. It's also very helpful to share the show, to tweet it out, to send it to someone who you think might like it, to drop a 5-star review on it in Apple Podcasts. All of those things are really, really helpful. So thank you to all of my existing patrons, and thank you to everyone that shares the show, and to you for listening. I'll be back next week. I believe it's going to be an episode about the game Toem, a really interesting indie game that came out just a couple of weeks ago, and I'm going to have Adam from Switch Indie Fix on as a guest to talk about Toem, and also to talk about a really interesting year that he had. He had a no new games 6 months where he made a spreadsheet of his backlog, didn't play any new games at all, didn't allow himself to buy any new games. And so I'm really interested to catch up with Adam to find out how that period was for him, what the best games that he found in his backlog were, about the kind of the habitual new game buying that I certainly do, and I know that a lot of people out there do as well, even stockpiling games that you have no intention to play in the immediate future. So I'm really interested to catch up with Adam and talk about that, and to talk about Toem, which is a really lovely little game, a black and white photography game. It's just adorable. It's got some short hike vibes going on. So thanks very much for listening. I'll be back next week. Take care of yourselves and each other. Bye-bye for now.